At Joe 5:47, the sun hadn't yet cleared the pines lining the east perimeter of Fort Liberty, but the sniper range was already alive. Echoes of shouted cadence faded as the last platoon jogged toward the mess hall. A soft breeze stirred the dew on the shooting benches, and Sergeant First Class Mike Alton checked his watch again, his boots crunching on the gravel path as he scanned the range. The 12 recruits were finishing setup, spotting scopes aligned, logbooks open, rifles meticulously placed. The class was handpicked from across branches: Marines, Army, a Navy corpsman who'd ranked top at marksmanship training, all of them sharp, all of them young, and most of them convinced they already knew everything. Travis Kane, a freshly commissioned lieutenant out of West Point, stood with too much weight on one foot, arms folded across his chest, sunglasses not yet needed. His M2010 ESR leaned against the bench, stock polished, bolt gleaming. He was the best shot in the class, and no one doubted he'd remind them of it again before noon. Then, without a word, someone stepped through the range gate. She walked like she belonged there, not fast, not slow, purposeful. A woman in her late 60s, maybe older, wearing a worn flannel shirt and faded jeans, no uniform, no insignia, just a leather case in one hand that looked older than most of the recruits. The gate guard had barely glanced at her papers before waving her through. Kane blinked behind his sunglasses and nudged the Marine next to him. "You seeing this?" The Marine, Corporal Dominguez, smirked. "Looks like my grandma found her way out of the commissary." The woman didn't look at them. She picked a spot at the far end of the firing line, bench 16, and placed the case down with care. Her movements were slow, but exact. Not slow from age, deliberate. Alton tilted his head, watching her. Something about her gait, the way her head moved slightly ahead of each step, eyes tracking everything but never lingering. Kane chuckled. "Bet she's lost. Or this is one hell of a make-a-wish." Laughter rippled among the others, though quieter now. She undid the brass latches and opened the case. Inside, wrapped in cloth and custom foam, was a rifle that looked like no standard issue they'd ever seen. Walnut stock, bolt action, barrel modified, a piece of history in working condition. "What the hell is that?" Dominguez asked. Vintage Remington, Kane guessed. "Maybe custom M40. Looks like something out of a museum." He raised his voice slightly. "Ma'am, you need directions." She didn't answer. Alton narrowed his eyes. He had 20 years in, seen enough to recognize posture, even in civilians. She wasn't lost. She was waiting. For what? He didn't yet know. He walked down the line, boots steady, saying nothing to the recruits. They were watching her now, some with interest, others with that particular brand of military skepticism reserved for outsiders. At 06:01, Colonel Nathan Hayes stepped out from the admin building, coffee in hand. He paused mid-sip when he saw her. Then he turned abruptly and went back inside. Nobody noticed except Alton. That told him plenty. Back on the line, the woman had begun assembling the rifle. The way she handled the parts, there was no fumbling, no second-guessing. Her fingers moved with familiarity, not flair, no wasted motion. She secured the scope long, matte black, subtly engraved, and adjusted the cheek rest with an Allen key from her pocket. "She's not sightseeing," Alton muttered. Kane shrugged. "She's not military either. Look at her. Civvies, old gear. Maybe someone's retired CO, or someone's mom trying to be cute." He said it too loud. The woman didn't flinch. At 06:08, a long silence stretched across the line. The kind that makes experienced men nervous. The kind before something shifts. And the recruits started to shift too, eyes narrowing, mouths clamping shut. Because while no one had said it, every one of them felt the same creeping thought. This woman knew exactly what she was doing. Alton stepped closer, not to question her, but to watch. She had the bolt locked and was checking windage on the optic. A modern rangefinder clipped to her belt. Subtle. And the case lining wasn't just foam. It was molded for gear. Custom. Precise. That's when Kane said it, loud enough to cut the quiet. "Let's see what the old lady can do." Several chuckled. One whistled. The tension broke for a second, but only for a second, because just then, Colonel Hayes returned. He didn't look at the recruits. He looked straight at the woman. His jaw tightened. Then he nodded. Alton caught it. The nod wasn't one of dismissal. It was acknowledgement. The kind of signal passed between soldiers who'd been somewhere they shouldn't have been, years before anyone was allowed to admit they'd been there at all. At 06:10, the air shifted, and for the first time that morning, no one said a word. By 06:12, the air around bench 16 had shifted from curiosity to something sharper. Maggie Holden worked with quiet precision. sliding the bolt into place with the kind of rhythm you'd expect from a seasoned mechanic or a surgeon used to tension. Her hands didn't tremble, not even a flicker. The recruits kept stealing glances while pretending to focus on their morning. Warm-ups? Lieutenant Travis Kane leaned on his elbow, chin tilted, watching with a look that said he'd already decided she didn't belong. His voice cut through the low murmur like a smart remark tossed across a high school cafeteria. I'm putting 20 on her being someone's mother-in-law. General's wife. Maybe. They give her a courtesy range pass each year. Dominguez snorted, not bothering to hide it. Or she wandered off from the PX looking for the bingo tent. Kane nodded at the leather case now open in front of her. Did you see that relic she brought? I've seen cleaner gear at pawn shops. Off-post. Bet that rifle hasn't fired since the Gulf War. The first one. It was enough to draw a few more chuckles. Private Fletcher, the youngest in the group, elbowed his buddy and whispered, "Think she even knows how to load a magazine?" Dominguez replied without missing a beat. "If she pulls out a black powder kit, I'm done." Maggie remained still, checking the torque on the scope mounts using a pocket wrench. The tool glinted once in the morning light. Nothing flashy, just well-maintained. She pulled a range card from her pocket, already scribbled with notes in a neat, practiced hand. Kane glanced back at the instructor station where Sergeant Alton stood, observing from a distance, seeing no movement. He leaned closer toward the rest of the group. She's not just old, she's quiet old. You know the type. The ones who want you to ask questions so they can tell war stories that didn't happen. Fletcher raised an eyebrow. Think she's bluffing? Kane grinned. Oh, definitely. We'll get some speech about Vietnam and her brother's friend who once held a rifle, and we'll all be expected to clap politely. One of the Air Force candidates, Airman Parker, chimed in. Maybe she's with logistics. Like, she helped ship ammo pallets in the 90s and now thinks that counts as ops. Experience. The laughter that followed was less casual now. Louder. A little meaner. The kind that builds on itself until someone crosses a line. Dominguez leaned back and called out, loud enough to carry but not quite enough to alert Alton. "Ma'am, you need help finding the gift shop." Maggie didn't answer. She didn't even blink. She adjusted the buttstock pad on her rifle and ran a gloved hand along the receiver. Every move was calm, every piece fit without resistance. Kane stood up and stretched theatrically, shaking out his arms as if preparing for a real competition. "I swear, if she actually takes a shot, I'll eat my issued boonie hat. Raw," Fletcher added. Maybe she's some retired clerk who watched too many war movies. They give out range time to retired desk jobs. Now Dominguez shook his head. No, this is a prank. Hazing from the brass, or a social experiment, like one of those hidden camera shows. She's not even nervous, Parker said. That's what gets me. Kane shrugged. Probably doesn't know enough to be nervous. As Maggie placed a round gently into the open action, fingers steady, a faint metallic click echoed across the range. She closed the bolt with an audible, confident snap. No one laughed at that. Alton had started walking again, slow and deliberate, eyes focused on Kane now. He wasn't smiling. At 06:16, the wind shifted slightly east. Maggie adjusted the windage knob with 2 short, practiced turns. The group went quiet. Not for any real reason, just instinct. Some part of them recognized what they hadn't been willing to admit. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't performance art. And that old rifle wasn't just decoration. At 06:18, silence hung like fog over the firing line. Maggie didn't look up. She didn't respond to the comments, the bets, the exaggerated stretching from Kane. She just lowered her cheek to the stock and adjusted the position of her right elbow. Kane finally stepped forward, pulling a silver dollar from his pocket. It flashed once in the morning light as he held it up between 2 fingers. "Tell you what," he said, voice too casual. "Hit this from the 100-yard marker, and I'll personally apologize to every person here." Twice. Alton's mouth twitched. He took a step as if to intervene, then stopped. He didn't know why. Something told him to wait. Kane turned to walk, slow and confident, toward the sandbag line marked at 100 yards. He stood tall, facing Maggie. "You ready?" Maggie didn't answer. She was already adjusting her optic, dialing in elevation, then setting windage with 2 smooth turns. Kane tossed the coin underhand. It rose, spinning against the sky, sunlight glinting off its face. It reached its apex, paused for a breathless instant, and then the rifle cracked. The sound was sharp, not deafening, clean. Not a flinch from her shoulder. The recoil was absorbed with practiced ease. No breath wasted, no motion unmeasured. The coin continued falling. Unremarkable at first. Kane grinned. Then it landed. The clink wasn't 1 note. It was 2. He frowned, stepped forward, eyes narrowing. He bent down, expecting a grazed edge. What he picked up made his chest tighten. 2 halves, perfectly split. The cut ran clean through the eagle's wings, right down to the tail feathers. Not bent, not torn, cleaved. Behind him, no one spoke, not even Dominguez. At 06:19, Colonel Hayes stepped onto the range. He didn't speak either. He just walked, slow and focused, until he reached Kane. The lieutenant turned, still holding both pieces of the coin. The colonel took them, examined the break, then turned toward Maggie. She was already disassembling the rifle. Calm, precise, bolt out, scope off, one component at a time, return to its velvet slots. As she leaned forward to close the case, her jacket shifted. Hayes paused. His eyes caught the edge of something inside the lining. A patch. Triangular. Black fabric with a faint red hourglass stitched in the center. He froze. For half a second, his entire posture changed. He stepped back, snapped a formal salute. The recruits blinked, unsure what they were seeing. "Captain Holden," he said. His voice was steady now. "Black badge program. They told us you were ghosts." Maggie stood, returned the salute. "Not ghosts, Colonel, just good at staying invisible." At 06:21, no one had anything left to say. They just stared, mouths slightly open, minds catching up. And Maggie. She picked up her case, locked it, and waited. The shot wasn't just clean. It was a statement, the kind that doesn't need repeating. At 06:22, the colonel still held the 2 halves of the silver dollar in one hand. He turned slightly, facing the line of stunned recruits. His expression, normally neutral behind aviator lenses, had shifted into something rare, respect, and something deeper, reverence. "I want your full attention," he said. His voice carried across the gravel, calm but unmistakable. "You are not looking at a visitor. You are not looking at someone who wandered in by mistake." The line straightened, shoulders pulled back, arms came off benches. "This," Hayes continued, "is Captain Margaret Holden. She served in a unit most of you have never heard of and likely never will." Again, officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it changed the shape of wars that history still refuses to acknowledge. Dominguez opened his mouth, then shut it. Kane didn't move at all. She was part of the Black Badge program, codename Widow, a classified sniper detachment activated during the height of the Cold War. They were deployed when every other option had failed. Their missions were so sensitive, even field generals weren't told the details. Only outcomes. Fletcher blinked. His hands were still resting on his rifle, but his grip had gone slack. Hayes held up the coin. Turning it so light flashed across the clean edge where the bullet had split. Captain Holden was responsible for 22 confirmed strategic eliminations. High-value targets, Soviet military scientists, field generals, arms traffickers operating under diplomatic covers, all behind enemy lines. None of it in any textbook. The silence deepened. No one even shifted their boots. "Actually," Maggie said from her spot near bench 16. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "It's 26. 4 were never officially recorded. Paperwork got lost." Hayes turned toward her and nodded. No hesitation. "Captain Holden's operational file is still sealed under executive classification, but I can confirm this much. She trained under programs that no longer exist, fired from positions the rest of us wouldn't consider survivable, and returned every time without leaving a footprint." Parker whispered something under his breath. Dominguez elbowed him. Nobody spoke after that. Alton had moved to stand beside the colonel now. He was watching Maggie with a look that said he was replaying every moment she had spent on the line. "The Black Badge units specialized in precision disruption," Hayes went on. "They didn't fight battles. They ended them before they started. They removed one keystone from the structure and let gravity do the rest." He paused and lowered the coin. "Everything about this unit was built around one principle. Deny your existence so thoroughly that even your success looks like coincidence. That's why none of you recognized her. That was her job. She was the best at it." Maggie hadn't moved. She had crossed her arms now, not defensive, just waiting. "You want to know how good she was?" Hayes asked. "The Soviets had a name for her, the Red Whisper. They thought she was a malfunction in their intelligence systems, a glitch in the kill chain, not a person." The last word hung in the air like a dropped shell casing. One by one, the recruits stood straight, not from instruction, not from command, instinct, the kind trained deep into their bones. Kane stepped back into line. His sunglasses came off. For the first time that morning, his eyes were focused, but not on the rifle. They were on her, the woman he'd mocked 15 minutes earlier. Maggie looked at him once, then at the others. No judgment in her face, just something older, sharper, forged under pressure most of them couldn't imagine. At 06:25, no one doubted her anymore. Not even themselves. At 06:27, Lieutenant Kane stepped forward from the line. His face had changed. Gone was the smugness, the showman's grin. His jaw was tight, his voice quiet but clear. "Captain Holden, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on how you looked and where you stood. I was wrong." Maggie didn't blink. She let the moment stretch. Then she gave the smallest of nods. "Respect is an ode to youth, Lieutenant," she said. "Or to confidence. It's earned through what you do when no one expects anything from you." Kane lowered his eyes. His hands stayed at his sides. This wasn't theater anymore. The rest of the recruits remained silent, not out of fear but out of something new. Recognition. Maggie wasn't just someone with stories. She was the kind of operator they all dreamed of becoming. And she hadn't come to impress anyone. She had come to observe, maybe to teach, but not to prove herself. Sergeant Alton took a step forward, arms folded. He gave Maggie a short nod. She returned it with a glance, subtle but understood. Hayes turned to face the recruits again. "Captain Holden will be observing training for the next 3 weeks. You are fortunate. What she teaches isn't in your manuals. It's not on the curriculum, but it's the difference between textbook success and operational survival." Maggie looked out over the line of faces. Some still young enough to think invincibility came with rank. Others old enough to know better. She walked slowly past them, her boots scuffing the gravel. "I've seen young men lose everything because they couldn't admit someone else knew more than them," she said. "And I've seen teams survive because one person swallowed their pride and listened when it mattered." She stopped near Kane. "You don't need to apologize with words. Lieutenant, you do it by learning, by adjusting, and by never assuming again that age means weakness, or that silence means ignorance." Kane nodded once. Maggie turned toward the group. "In the field, the best I ever served with were the ones who said the least. They didn't talk about what they could do. They did it. And when it was done, they moved on. No medals, no pictures, just a quiet record of actions that mattered." Dominguez shifted slightly. His expression was unreadable now. "Your gear won't save you," Maggie continued. "Neither will your rank. What matters is how you carry yourself when no one's watching. That's the difference between elite and expendable." At 06:31, the recruits were no longer looking at her the way they had. They weren't just impressed, they were listening. And for the first time all morning, Maggie gave a half smile. "Let's begin." By 06:42, the range had shifted from posturing to precision. Maggie moved slowly down the firing line, not with the presence of someone taking command, but with the calm weight of someone who had nothing left to prove. She stopped behind Private Fletcher first. He had settled into a standard prone position, legs slightly too wide, shoulders a bit too high, his cheek pressed too tightly into the stock. "Relax your grip," she said quietly. "You're strangling the rifle. Let it rest into you." He adjusted. "Now you're breathing. Count to 4 on the inhale. Hold at natural pause. Don't force it. Fire just before the exhale resumes." Fletcher nodded, not speaking. Maggie glanced at his target downrange. She reached and made a small correction to his rear bag. "You're tilted slightly left. At long range, that throws you off inches. Inches become misses when it matters." She moved on. At each station, she offered no lectures, just simple, precise instructions. She corrected wrist angles, shifted support elbows, checked scope alignment. Every move she made had the fluidity of thousands of repetitions. At Kane's position, she paused. His setup was textbook, but his muscles were still tense. "You're trying to control too much," she said. "That's not how this works. Sniping isn't about domination. It's about allowance." He furrowed his brow. "You let the wind talk. You let your body settle. You don't fight the shot. You wait for it." Kane nodded, then readjusted his shoulder pressure. Maggie tapped the toe of his right boot with her own. "Shift that 3 degrees inward. Reduces micro-vibration. Helps you hold longer." She turned toward the range. The flags were barely fluttering, but the air shimmered just above the berm. "What do you see?" she asked. Parker answered first. "Wind's calm. 10 o'clock to 2. Maggie shook her head. "Look past the flags. Look through your scope. What do the mirage lines say?" There was a pause. "Mirage," Dominguez asked. "The shimmer, heat distortion. It shows wind movement at target level. The flags lie. Mirage tells the truth." She stepped behind Fletcher again and adjusted his parallax slightly. "See how the waves bend? That's a left-to-right push. Not much. Maybe a half MOA adjustment." He exhaled and nodded. As the minutes passed, even the more skeptical recruits leaned into her instruction. Maggie's pace never hurried. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence between her words held more impact than lectures. When Sergeant Alton walked past at 070, he didn't say a thing, just folded his arms and observed. Occasionally, he nodded. Just once. Maggie reached the end of the line, then turned back. We work fundamentals today. Tomorrow we test what happens when conditions fall apart. She paused. Sniping isn't just hitting targets. It's about preparation, patience, and pattern recognition. You don't chase the shot. You let the shot come to you. They didn't answer, but they heard it. And for the first time, they understood what it meant to be taught by someone who had waited days in silence for a single bullet to matter. At 0718, Maggie laid the two halves of the silver dollar on the target platform, edges facing each other. She measured the 1-inch gap precisely, then stepped back without a word. The challenge wasn't for drama. It was a test. Lieutenant Kane lay prone, adjusting his optic. His expression was tighter than usual, but not with arrogance. Focus had replaced swagger. He had something to prove now, and he knew it. Alton stood nearby, arms crossed, watching like a man who had seen potential before but waited for confirmation. The others stayed silent behind the firing line. No side remarks, no smirks, just eyes tracking Kane's every movement. Kane exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was clean, smooth, textbook. Maggie raised her binoculars without speaking. Her brow barely moved. 3 inches right, she said. You flinched at trigger break. Kane nodded once. No excuse. He adjusted windage and body position, then settled again. This time his breathing was slower, deeper. Second shot. The recoil snapped gently against his shoulder. Everyone tracked the bullet's path through the scope screens set behind the line. 1 inch left, Maggie said. Mirage was denser this time. You didn't adjust. Kane tapped his scope, then looked at the heat distortion drifting across the target. He stayed prone, no frustration, just recalculation. Maggie stepped beside him, crouching. She didn't touch the rifle, just watched. You're close, she said, but this isn't about the coin. He didn't respond. First time's luck. Second is learning. Third tells me if you can carry the lesson. Kane breathed once, then again. At his natural pause, he fired. No one moved. No one even breathed until Maggie spoke. Dead center, she said. Right through the gap. Didn't touch either half. Behind the line. Someone clapped. Then another. In seconds, it broke loose. A cheer rippled through the recruits. Dominguez let out a long whistle. Fletcher pumped a fist. Even Parker let out a quiet, awed laugh. Kane stayed prone for a moment longer. Just long enough to process it. He looked over his shoulder. That was the most focused I've ever been, he said. Ever. Maggie nodded. That's how it should feel. Every time. Alton nodded once from his spot. Maggie stood. Now do it again, she said. Her voice was calm, but it hit like a challenge. Kane blinked, then gave the smallest grin. You serious wants his chance, Maggie replied. Twice his proof. He turned back to the rifle. The others watched now not as critics, but as peers. They had seen him fail. They had seen him adjust. And now, they saw what it looked like to earn a moment. When Kane fired again, it came faster, smoother. Maggie raised the binoculars, checked the target, and gave the subtlest nod. Good. At 0728, Maggie didn't say much else. She didn't need to, because everyone watching knew what they'd seen. A kid who thought he was the best had just met someone who didn't care about rank, age, or reputation, and still helped him become better. At 1807, the range was nearly empty. Golden light stretched long across the gravel, casting sharp shadows behind the benches. Most of the recruits had packed up, but a few lingered, wiping down barrels, logging shot groups, stealing glances at the woman who had changed the course of their day. Maggie stood beside the sandbags, looking out toward the distant targets. Her hands rested lightly on her hips. Eyes narrowed not at the range but somewhere farther back in time. Colonel Hayes approached, slow and quiet. He didn't speak right away. You didn't have to come back, he said finally. I know, Maggie replied, but I wanted to see if what we built still mattered. Hayes didn't press. He just waited. They're sharp, Maggie said. Raw, but sharp. They've got all the gear. Digital wind meters, range-finding optics, fire control software. But the moment that tech fails, most of them freeze, because they've never learned to feel for the answer. She turned slightly, scanning the line of flags now limp in the cooling air. Back in 82, we had nothing but gut, gravity, and instinct. No satellites, no drones, no second chances. She paused, then gave a half smile. I was in a village in northern Poland, waiting on a target who only came home on Wednesdays. He'd walk from the ministry building to his dacha just before sundown. Took me 3 days to confirm his pattern. Where were you set up drainage trench? Maggie replied. Water up to my ribs. No cover above ground, just one access point. If someone looked too hard, I'd have had 20 seconds to either disappear or die. Hayes folded his arms. How did you read wind no flags, no sensors, just laundry? He raised an eyebrow. Every home had a line stretched between trees or balconies. I mapped every one of them, watched the cloth move, noticed how some would flutter faster before others, built a wind map with nothing but damp sheets and cotton. She turned toward him. By the time he stepped into his backyard, I knew exactly how many seconds I had, how far the gust would drift my round, how long it would take before the shot reached him. And it worked. One shot, right through the shoulder blade. Heart-lung collapse. Dropped with a cup of tea still in his hand. Hayes exhaled. That's not a story you'd find in the marksmanship handbook. That's why I came, she said, because they'll never know unless someone tells them. You can't program instinct. You have to live it, learn it, when nothing else works. She looked back toward the empty benches. They've been taught by trainers who never missed, never failed. That's dangerous, because when the wind shifts in the wrong moment and everything breaks, only experience will keep them alive. At 1812, Hayes didn't answer. He didn't have to. The weight of her words had already settled in, and in that sunset silence, it was clear she hadn't come back for applause. She had come to pass the torch. At 1817, the air had cooled just enough that the gravel no longer radiated heat. Maggie remained near the edge of the range, arms loosely folded, eyes still fixed on the distant targets that now glowed amber in the setting. Son, Lieutenant Kane approached quietly. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside her, gaze following hers. After a moment, he glanced down at the coin halves still resting in his pocket. Can I ask something, he said. Maggie gave a small nod. Why was it called the Black Widow program? She didn't answer at first. Instead, she reached down and picked up a small twig, turning it between her fingers like she was weighing its balance. We didn't choose the name, she said finally. Some general with a flair for drama picked it. Said black widows were small, overlooked, but lethal. She let the twig fall. He thought the name would scare people. The idea that something tiny and silent could take out someone important? That fear was part of the mission. Did it fit? Kane asked. Some of it, Maggie replied. We operated alone, moved quietly, struck fast, and left no trace. But the name missed what mattered most. What's that patience? Kane waited, unsure if she would say more. She did. They thought we were just killers, that we were all trigger. But real work was waiting. Days, sometimes weeks, watching, calculating, understanding how one person's removal would affect 10 others. She glanced back toward the range. A black widow doesn't waste energy. She waits until the moment is right, then finishes what needs doing. Kane nodded slowly. That sounds like legacy. Maggie looked at him then, her expression soft but firm. That's why I came back, to scare us to pass it on. She exhaled, the breath long and even. Most of us faded out when the program was shut down. Took new names, quiet jobs, and never told anyone what we did. Some died with the secret still sealed. She looked up at the sky, now streaked in purple and orange. The worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was knowing the skills, the instincts would go with us. And maybe one day, someone would need them again and wouldn't know where to start. Kane didn't respond. He didn't need to. So no, Maggie said. I didn't come back for recognition. I came because ghosts don't get legacy unless they show up once in a while and remind people they were real. At 1822, the last bit of sun slipped below the trees. Maggie turned from the range and walked back toward the benches, the shadows behind her long, but the weight she carried just a little lighter. At 05:39 the next morning, the recruits assembled early. The air was cooler, the ground damp from an overnight mist. Maggie stood in front of the line with Sergeant Alton, clipboard in hand, as the final target lanes were being positioned. Today's not about comfort, she said, voice crisp. It's about adaptation. Real-world conditions don't care about your perfect form or calibrated optics. Behind her, range crews had set up 3 different lanes. One with an angled firing position, uneven rocks, and loose gravel. Another with artificial fog rolling from a portable generator and high-mounted, lights casting awkward glare. The third had wind machines angled to simulate a steady 15-knot crosswind. Each lane tests something different, she continued. The first challenges your posture. The second, your eyes. The third, your discipline under environmental distortion. 1 shot per lane. One chance to get it right. Kane shifted his stance. Dominguez cracked his neck. Fletcher adjusted his gloves twice in the same motion. Maggie pointed at the first station. "Corporal Dominguez, you're up." Station 1. He jogged over, dropping to a crouch, then laid prone on the uneven surface. The incline rolled slightly downhill, causing his barrel to cant left. "Check your level," Maggie called. Dominguez looked through the bubble level on his scope, made 2 fast adjustments to the bipod legs, and exhaled. He fired. Maggie didn't react, but Alton called the result hit, 2 inches high. Compensated correctly but rushed trigger pull. Dominguez nodded, climbed back to his feet, and jogged off. Next. Each recruit rotated through. Parker's shot was on target, but late he'd hesitated. Fletcher's round drifted wide from improper wind hold. Maggie gave notes each time, sharp and specific. At Station 2, with the low fog and angled lights, visibility dropped dramatically. Even with high-end optics, the recruits struggled to find the reticle contrast. "You don't always get to see your target clearly," Maggie said. "Learn to trust pattern, not just sight. When the brain panics, muscle memory saves lives." Walker's turn came on that lane. He settled in fast. Maggie crouched behind him, whispering, "Ignore the glare. Focus on edge definition. Use the haze as a filter, not a block." He fired. Hit, just left of center, one of the cleanest all morning. "Good," Maggie said. "Now remember how that felt. That's your new baseline." The last station was the hardest. Mirage rolled just above the terrain, and the crosswind was constant but inconsistent in micro shifts. Maggie made them call their holds aloud before firing. Parker 3 clicks right. 1 up. Missed. Dominguez 4. Right. Hit, but barely clipped edge. Kane lay down last. He closed his eyes before settling in. "Call it," Maggie said. 2 right. No vertical. Slight mirage shift in right quadrant. "Fire." He did. Bullseye. At 06:26, Maggie stood in front of the group again. Some were sweating. Some were frustrated. But none of them looked bored. You won't always know where the shot's coming from. You won't always have a range flag. What you do have is repetition. Instinct. If you've done it enough, your body will tell you what your brain doesn't have time to figure out. She let that sit. That's why we train hard. Because in the real world, the first mistake is often the last. No one argued with her. They just nodded and reset their stations. At 06:47, Walker stepped into position for the final stage of evaluation. The others had already cycled through. Some had performed well. Others had cracked under the pressure. But every recruit now stood quietly behind the line. Eyes on him. He didn't rush. He unfolded his bipod, adjusted his stock, then checked the mirage. His movements were measured, not hesitant, confident, but quiet. Maggie watched from just behind the scope line. Her arms were crossed, but her expression had softened. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Walker leveled the scope, then ran the bolt slowly, checking chamber pressure, even though he already knew it was good. He waited, breathed twice. On the third, he fired. The sound cracked down the range, sharp and tight. Colonel Hayes stepped forward just as the hit was confirmed. Direct center, sub-inch deviation. Walker stayed prone for a second, eyes still behind the optic. Then he exhaled and sat back slowly. No fist pump, no grin, just a nod to himself. He stood, turned, and locked eyes with Maggie. She gave the smallest nod of approval. He smiled. Just once. "That's the version of you I want to see more of," she said. "The one who listens before speaking." Walker nodded again. Colonel Hayes cleared his throat, then looked at Maggie. "Captain Holden, your impact in the past 3 days has exceeded anything I've seen in over a decade of advanced sniper oversight. We'd like to formalize your role. Advisory. Instructional. Long-term." Maggie looked at him for a moment. "I appreciate that, Colonel. Truly. But I've never worked well inside structures. That's why my unit worked. Minimal oversight. No red tape. We were free to adapt, not fill out reports." Hayes nodded once. He wasn't surprised. "The offer stands. If you ever change your mind," she gave him a quiet smile. "What you're building here is good. These recruits, they're more than just statistics on a training board. They're starting to understand what it means to be still, to think, to respect the shot." Walker stepped forward. "You taught me more in 48 hours than I got in my last 3 courses. Thank you." Maggie tilted her head. "Then pass it on." At 06:52, the recruits started breaking down stations. Kane lingered near the target boards, staring at the clean punch his round had made. He didn't say anything, but his posture said enough. He hadn't just redeemed himself in front of her. He'd proven something to himself, something no ribbon or ranking ever could. Maggie turned, picked up her case, and walked slowly toward the admin building. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. At 2010, the mess hall was quieter than usual. The overhead lights hummed softly, and the smell of powdered coffee lingered in the air. Most of the trays had been cleared, and the staff had started to clean. But one corner remained filled with voices waiting for something different. Maggie sat at the far table. The recruits gathered loosely around her. No formal seating, no notes, just elbows on tables and quiet anticipation. Even Colonel Hayes stood at the edge, arms folded, saying nothing. Maggie took a slow sip from her tin cup, then placed it down carefully. "I don't talk about operations," she said. "Not because I'm sworn to silence, though I was, but because most people don't understand what the hardest part really is." Kane leaned forward slightly. "It's not the shot," Maggie said. "It's the waiting, the silence, the knowing that if you flinch, if you breathe wrong, if you think too loud, it could all be over." She looked down at the cup, not seeing it. It was February 1978, East Germany. Target was a physicist developing missile systems we couldn't counter. Not yet. My job was to end the project before it reached final phase. Dominguez shifted his weight, then stilled again. He had a schedule. Tight, but no patterns outside work. The only place we could get eyes on him was a rail line near his home. We found a storm drain beneath the access route, 8 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, mostly dry. It was perfect. She paused, except it wasn't, Parker asked, quietly. "What happened?" "It rained the day before insertion. Water level was ankle deep when I crawled in. By the next day, it was thigh high and just above freezing. You stayed in 3 days," Maggie said. "No fire, no movement. Wrapped myself in chemical heat pads taped to my torso. 8 once per 24 hours. MRE paste. No chewing. Too loud." "What about your gear?" Fletcher asked. "Had to keep everything off the floor. Rifle was suspended by parachute cord above the waterline. Scope wrapped in waterproof canvas, trigger sealed with rubber." "How'd you track the target?" "The village had 2 laundry lines visible from my position. Each day, clothes went up around 1540, depending on how they moved. I could read wind patterns across 4 quadrants of the approach." Hayes nodded slowly. The method was familiar. On day 3, the target exited his home precisely at 15:55. I had 6 seconds of visibility between trees and fence lines. First second, verify identity. Second and third, track walk pattern. Fourth, confirm no civilians. Fifth, exhale. Sixth, fire. And he dropped where he stood, collapsed forward. Teacup shattered next to his face. He was dead before the sound reached him. The room was silent. Then what Kane asked? Nothing. Extraction was pre-positioned. I crawled out at 03:00 the next morning. Frostbite in my right foot. Took 3 weeks to regain full function. No one debriefed me. Just a cold cot and a warm envelope with cash. Fletcher asked, "Did anyone thank you?" Maggie smiled. Faintly. "No, that wasn't the point. We weren't there for medals. We were there to make sure someone else didn't have to." She looked around the table. "You're taught to think the shot is the climax, but most of your career will be waiting, observing, fighting the urge to act too soon. Patience saves lives more than bullets do." At 2026, no one was eating anymore. They just sat with the weight of what they'd heard. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. Maggie stood and nodded toward the door. "Same time tomorrow. Bring your rifles. We'll start with movement drills." And just like that, she walked out, not as a myth, not as a legend, but as someone who had waited in water for 3 days, so others wouldn't have to. At 06:04, the sky was still pale with the first light. The range stood silent, not yet awake, except for 2 figures at bench 4. Walker stood beside Maggie, the morning breeze nudging the fabric of his fatigues. In his hand, wrapped in cloth, were the 2 halves of the silver dollar. He held them out, palms open. "I've been meaning to give these back," he said. Maggie didn't move to take them. "Keep them," she said. "They're yours now." Walker blinked, confused, "But I didn't earn them." "Not like you did." Maggie looked at him, then not with challenge, but with clarity. That coin wasn't about marksmanship, it was about judgment. About how quickly you chose to dismiss what didn't fit your picture of strength. Walker's posture tensed. He wasn't defensive, just ashamed. "I didn't see what was in front of me," he said. "No, you didn't," Maggie replied, "but that's not what mattered. What mattered was how you responded once you realized it." She sat down slowly on the bench, nodding for him to do the same. The range behind them remained still, wind barely disturbing the grass beyond the targets. You asked me yesterday why I chose you, why I pushed you harder than the others, Walker nodded. Because you were loud, confident, sure of yourself, but untested in the one way that matters most. He looked down. You'd never failed. She continued, not really. And it showed. Your grip was too tight. Your reaction time, half a beat slow when challenged, because you didn't know what it meant to fall flat in front of others and still get back up. Walker let the weight of those words settle. Then he spoke, softly. And now I do. Maggie smiled, faintly. Exactly. That's the point. That's why I picked you. He ran his thumb along the edge of one coin half. The cut was still sharp, clean, like it had happened a moment ago. So what do I do with them? Let them remind you, Maggie said. That skill fades, gear changes, rank shifts, but the ability to adapt to listen, adjust, and keep learning, that's what makes you useful. He looked at her. Even when no one's watching, especially then, she stood slowly, brushing off the back of her jacket. You'll lead people someday, maybe soon, maybe later. And when you do, remember this. She nodded toward the range. The empty field, the unseen distances. Let your actions speak first. Your words should be echoes, not introductions. Walker stood too, the coins still in his hand. Thank you, he said. Maggie gave a small nod. Don't thank me. Just prove me right. At 06:12, the others began arriving, gear in tow, boots thudding softly across gravel. They spotted the two already at the bench, talking quietly, and said nothing, just began preparing. Maggie stepped away, case in hand, moving toward the far end of the field where she liked to observe alone. Walker stayed at bench 4, the coins now back in his pocket, not as trophies, but as reminders of what it meant to fail with grace and rise with purpose.